History wants to know who was in the room where it happened. What did they say? What did they do? What decisions did President Bush and his team make in the days after 9/11? What were President Obama's advisors thinking during the Osama bin Laden raid? The University of Virginia's Miller Center sees recording White House memories as the first step in learning and teaching the lessons of history. For almost 5 decades, the Miller Center's oral history program has strived to preserve an accurate account of the facts, capturing the thoughts and memories of presidents, senior White House officials, and cabinet secretaries who were in the room where it happened. Those decades have witnessed 4 impeachment proceedings, 2 Gulf Wars, and a global war on terror, the first war in Europe since World War II, the first Black president and vice president, the first female vice president, and 3 female secretaries of state, 9/11, a global pandemic, a financial collapse, and constitutional crises. At the Miller Center, we go behind the scenes to understand the moments that make or break a presidency. Why the Miller Center? Our world-renowned team of oral history experts has been interviewing senior officials from every administration since Gerald Ford. Brent Scowcroft, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld, here at the Miller Center in 1977, would go on to serve in other administrations, and we would interview them again and again. By capturing their oral histories, their experiences early in their careers, we had a window into how they made momentous decisions when they became National Security Advisor, Vice President, and Defense Secretary for Ronald Reagan, George Herbert Walker Bush, and George W. Bush. We have interviewed people who held high office under Presidents Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. We begin our presidential oral history project shortly after a president leaves office, as soon as we have obtained the funding to support the project. Moving fast is essential. Memories fade as time goes on, and officials can pass away before we have a chance to preserve their thoughts. We typically interview about 100 officials, starting with the senior-most members of a president's White House team, the most important cabinet officials, and the president when possible. Our scholars allow each interviewee to reflect candidly. They share authentic words of praise for how the White House operated. They also share unexpected criticisms, regrets, and disappointments.
One of the real problems you have with any new administration, even one as experienced as ours was, is we weren't a bunch of amateurs. We'd been around there before. It's hard, that there is no training ground for senior civilian political leaders in an administration. We were lucky.
The work for these interviews begins long before the sessions start. Each person interviewed receives a briefing book. These books are assembled by the Miller Center's professional researchers and contain timelines, speeches, news reports, and public assessments of the individuals and issues that shape an administration. We cover administrations from the day they entered the White House to the day they left. Many of these officials have served in past administrations. They often know our scholars and our reputation for rigor and strict confidentiality, which promotes candor. We also interview lesser known but deeply influential officials. Once each individual interviewee signs over the deed to their own oral history, those transcripts are released to the general public. We roll out the project with major media and scholarly events, plus books that are able to give a deeper and more nuanced understanding of U.S. presidencies than the daily fast histories written by journalists in real time. Some interviews are only released posthumously. Per his request, a second portion of our oral history with Brent Scowcroft was released after Scowcroft passed away in 2020. The New York Times, Peter Baker wrote about the revelations in that new and important transcript, key moments in which Scowcroft's proposals failed in the war against Saddam Hussein. Baker has frequently relied on Miller Center oral history materials.
I've discovered in the process of doing books and reading your oral histories and so forth, the reporters at the White House, I think we get about 20% of what's really going on at a given time in real time. We don't know. I don't know yet, and we may not know until Russell does the oral history some days down the road.
I would say, Mr. President or Madam President, the first thing you must do is call the Miller Center and listen to those people, because they are nonpartisan and they are smart and they care deeply about our country, and they're going to help it.
History is talking. We at the Miller Center are listening.
Welcome, everyone. It's great to see you all. And this is a very special day for the Miller Center because, as you saw in that video, one of our most important colleagues, friends, consumers, and producers of material that we use is with us today. So please give a warm welcome to Peter Baker. So we are just a little over a month before the midterm elections, and midterms are usually a referendum on the sitting president. Yet somehow or another, this year's midterm seems to be as much about the past president as the sitting one. Former president dominates headlines and policy discussions. He left a permanent stamp on the Republican Party, and he's still shaping the Biden presidency. That's why it's important now more than ever to understand Donald Trump and his presidency. And with Peter Baker today, we have, along with his wife, Susan Glasser, the first full 4-year history of the Trump presidency. It's a deeply researched book with over 300 interviews of officials, both who served in the administration and served in Congress. And more than that, it brings their insights from having covered Washington politics for decades. Peter himself has written books about James Baker, about the Bill Clinton impeachment. With Susan, he's written a book about Vladimir Putin, as well as James Baker. And so in addition to his coverage of the New York Times of the Trump presidency and Susan's coverage for the New Yorker, they bring this extraordinary insight to how the presidency actually works. And so this is a must-read book. I will say that I dreaded reading it at the beginning. I dread reading anything that's 650 pages.
Okay. It's a fast read.
It is a fast read, but it's also a thoughtful, deeply researched, and deeply thought through book, and I commend it to everyone. I want to start in talking this through with Peter about first why and how he and Susan got into this. Why this book? Why put yourself back through this period? And maybe tell us a little about the title.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me. I'm delighted to be here, especially with Bill, the whole team at the Miller Center. What you saw in the video is absolutely correct. I am a huge fan of the Miller Center. More importantly, I am a huge consumer of the Miller Center because I have relied on it enormously time and time again for my research, and I have found it to be the indispensable repository of presidential history. Seriously, you guys do fabulous work. I'm already thinking about my next book and started looking through some Miller Center oral histories to sort of think through what I'm mulling. So thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. And as a native Virginian, I'm always delighted to be in Charlottesville. Why this book? Well, you know what? I think that first of all, I think that for a lot of the reasons you say in the video, it's important to document history relatively soon after it happens to get people while their memories are fresh, while people are still around, while they're willing to talk, while the issues are still acute. The difference between this book and some of the other ones that I've done and my wife and I have done is that it's not just a work of history. This actually also may be prologue, right? In other words, the story is not done. It was the publisher that wanted to put the dates on the cover. The subtitle is Trump in the White House. That's how we envisioned it. They wanted to be Trump in the White House 2017 to 2021. And I thought they said it was because they wanted to frame the book and make sure people understood why it was different. This is the first book that tries to get all 4 years, not just a slice of the White House, not just a particular issue, but the big picture for 4 years. So they thought those dates communicated that. But the more time has gone on, and the closer we get to announcements for 2024, it now looks more like a threat. One of our reviewers, very nice guy, says, I like the book. I just hope they don't write a sequel, but that was not the intent. But we thought it's important to bear witness to history, and because in some ways this could be prologue, because I do think, if you want to think about 2024 and what might be, it's important to know what happened in these 4 years. Why the title? Because one of the things that makes President Trump unique in the annals, at least of the modern presidency, is that he both governs during times of great polarization and encourages them. He is not the creator of our divisions in American society. We were divided before he came along, but he is the ultimate manifestation of them and an exacerbator of them. That he is, in fact, that was his strategy. That is his approach. That is the essence of his presidency is about division. That's how he saw his path to the White House. And he divided not just the country, he divided his own party, he divided his own White House, he divided his own family. And it was a consistent theme throughout. Every politician is a divider on some level. Politics is about division on some level, because we are saying in a campaign, my side is better than your side. My ideas are better than your ideas. My candidate is more qualified than your candidate. So division is part and parcel of the system. Nothing wrong with that on some level. Negative campaign ads did not emerge for the first time in the last 5 years. But President Trump, in my experience, in my study of this at least, is the first one to whom division was the be all and end all, right? Other presidents, at least, even if they were divisive figures at times, came to the office recognizing that the office also required something larger, that there was a responsibility to lead the whole country, at least in times of crisis, at least in times of national purpose. They aspired to bigger things. But George H.W. Bush said that we should be a kinder, gentler nation. Bill Clinton said he wanted to be a repairer of the breach, citing Isaiah. George W. Bush said he wanted to be a uniter, not a divider. Barack Obama said there's not a red America, a blue America, but a United States of America. And all four of these guys didn't always live up to that great ideal. All four of them were at times quite divisive, right? But they at least understood that there was some greater purpose to the presidency. And so what makes Trump different is he didn't see it that way. He saw division as the day in, day out modus operandi of governing. And I think that's what's important to get at here.
Peter, thank you. And I want to take us through 3 dimensions of the presidency that we try to focus on at the Miller Center. The president's powers in the office, the big policy things that drive a presidency, and then how the president relates to the American people. So let's start with power. One of the first things that we see presidents do is build their government, appoint people. There are 4,000 presidentially appointed positions, 1,000 of which get confirmed. It's a big, big number. And people is power, personnel is power. So tell us about the people that work. And you worked for President Trump. In your book, you sort of have some catch labels for them. There are the true believers, there are enablers, there's the access of adults. There are the ones that get fired and the ones who quit.
Yeah.
Sometimes those are overlapping.
Yes.
Some people move back and forth.
Some people just, yeah, exactly.
Tell us a little bit about the people that populated the Trump administration.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. What one former White House official told us and told other people that President Trump was habitually unhappy with the people working for him, that the only people that President Trump liked were the people who used to work for him and the people who are going to work for him. This is somebody who did work for him and experienced it firsthand. Yeah, this was the most tribal White House that I think we've seen in a long time. Again, other White Houses had their divisions. You know, we did write a book about James Baker. He and Ed Meese didn't always see eye to eye. They at times were at odds inside the Reagan White House. That's normal. And sometimes it's caustic and costly to a presidency. It's not normal, doesn't mean it's good, but it's not unusual. This was the most tribal White House from the very start of the presidency. There, from the very beginning, there were already 3 or 4 competing camps. There was the RNC crowd led by Reince Priebus, the first chief of staff. These were the regulars who were coming in, hoping they could kind of steer the president into a normal, relatively normal presidency. There was the Steve Bannon crowd. These are the disruptors, the bomb throwers, the ones who wanted to blow up the system, who wanted to steer the president away from the normal kind of presidency. In fact, it was Steve Bannon who, talking about our cover title, said shortly after the election, we didn't get elected to bring the country together. That was not his goal. His goal was not to bring the country together. Then there was the Jared Kushner family tribe, right? The Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, and the people that they brought around them. Some of them were Democrats, some of them are New Yorkers, who globalists, even a few of them, right? Gary Cohn, who was national economics advisor. So you had this warring camps from literally day one. They didn't have time to get to hate each other because they came in hating each other, and their main goal was to get ahead of the other camp, or to take out the other camp, or to survive the attacks of the other camp. So it was a very, very, and here's the thing about it. Other presidents may have looked the other way when these things happen. Other presidents may have tried not to even get involved. This one encouraged it. He liked it. He liked
jungle politics.
He liked jungle politics. He liked people fighting. For him, that was the way it ought to be. And he encouraged it.
Yeah, let's talk about process a little bit. And to what the president got elected on. In his famous convention speech in 2016, he said, I alone can fix it. I alone can do this. And there is a pretty vibrant theory of presidential authority. It's got a new title, The Unitary Theory of the Executive. It tends to run against the deep state, which typically is career government. But the one thing that you, I think, do an extraordinary job of saying, which is often the deep state are the people he appointed.
Yeah.
But isn't that what he was elected to do? Wasn't he elected in this sort of plebiscitary way to actually be the decider?
Yes. I mean, we elect our presidents to be the decider, but we elect them to be the decider within a system of government that envisions and encourages checks and balances. Right. So what makes Trump, one of the many things that makes Trump unique, of course, he's the only president who came to office without a single day in government or military service. Never spent a day in public service force. So it's all new to him. And his idea, I think, was that it would be like the Trump organization, his family business, which has no shareholders and no board of directors. It was entirely up to him. Whatever happened in the Trump organization was his decision. And I think he discovered, to his chagrin, that it doesn't work that way in government, that there is a Congress, there are courts, there are agencies, there are even agencies that report to him are to some extent independent of him. And I think that was for him a little bit of a shock. He said at one point, he said multiple times, he said, Article 2 gives me absolute power. And he used it in context of this or that particular issue or decision. But in fact, Article 2 does not give the president absolute power. On very few things does a president have absolute power. The ability to pardon is one of the few, and even that has some limits. But that's the way he saw the government, and he was frustrated that it couldn't be done the way he wanted. I heard him. I was on Air Force One with him. He waxed jealous of Xi Jinping, who he had just met with from China, because Xi Jinping didn't have to bother with courts. He would have long appeals. If he wanted to put somebody to death for fentanyl distribution, he could do it, and it would take place just like that. This is the way he saw it, and he was constantly frustrated. When a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the more liberal one based in California, ruled against him on some immigration policy, he told his Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, let's cancel the court. You go do that. Go cancel the court. Well, I'm not sure that's something we can do, sir. Well, if you have to go to Congress, fine, go to Congress, but cancel that court. That's what he wanted to do. So he was not accustomed to those kind of checks and balances, or at least certainly not willing to live with them. Now, a deep state, look, every president is frustrated by the permanent bureaucracy. That's Democrat or Republican. And it is a fact of life. And there's no question that there is a legitimate debate to be had about that. A president should be able to do what he or she wants within limits. It's the limits that we are debating here.
There's this one instance, Peter, that I'd love for you to talk about, where I think it was John Bolton with others. And I can't remember if it was on the selling of Ukraine, but the selling of arms to Ukraine. But where John Bolton is actually not just working behind the president's back within the administration, he's actually on the phone calling members of Congress.
Yes.
Now, is that normal? Does that happen in
foreign officials
and foreign officials?
Yeah, no, it's not unheard of, but usually a person who works for a president is not rallying opposition to him from the outside. That's not the way we at least envision the government working. Now, he felt like he had to in order to keep Trump on track, to keep him from doing things that he considered to be unwise or reckless. This, of course, is not a functional way of doing business. It may have been necessary from his point of view, given the exigent circumstances, but he was going to Congress, going to Paul Ryan, going to other members of Congress saying, hey, you got to talk him out of this. It's crazy. He's going to do this nutty thing. He went to the Japanese to talk to them, see if Shinzo Abe could influence him, make sure he didn't give away the store on the nuclear negotiations with North Korea. He wasn't the only one who did it. When you know, and that was, in fact, you know, it was the only way to try to get to him. But there was a time when President Trump went to England for a meeting with the Queen. God rest her soul, just passed away. And his staff thought, aha, this is an opportunity for us to get through to him on climate change. So they asked Prince Charles, now King Charles II, if he would talk to President Trump about climate change, because they figure he doesn't listen to his staff, but he does listen to, he respects the royals, maybe he'll listen to them and he can get through to him. So Prince Charles agrees, but then it didn't exactly work. President Trump came back and said, oh my God, that was the worst lunch I ever had. All he wanted to talk about was climate change. So it didn't actually work out the way they thought. But you're right, this is not a way a functioning White House ought to work. It is the way this White House worked.
You mentioned Congress in there, and I want you to talk a little bit about the relationships with Congress. Presidential power is really shared, right? So there are some things the presidency can do, but you can't pass a law without Congress.
Yep.
And Congress also is responsible for confirming the officials you want to put forward, and on a lot of things, has shared responsibility. So tell us a little bit about Mitch McConnell and President Trump.
Mitch McConnell and President Trump. Okay. Well, let's just say they're not friends. When we went down to Mar-a-Lago to interview President Trump for this book, he lashed out at all kinds of people because that's what he does. But the one person he saved the most venom for, the person he was most angriest at, was Mitch McConnell. I mean, he just again and again and again kept saying what a, dirty SOB he was, a terrible person, a traitor, a backstabber, all this kind of thing. And Mitch McConnell, if you put him on Truth Serum, would tell you more or less the same thing about President Trump. He is not a fan. They had this interesting alliance of interests and ceasefire, a truce, basically, for about 3.5 years of the presidency. There had been a blow up in the first summer of 2017 between the two, and Mitch McConnell comes to the Oval Office and they have a deal, basically says, look, we're not going to always see eye to eye, but we have some things we both want to do. Let's talk about judges. Let's focus on making judges our project, our joint project. And they both had an interest in doing that. And they were very successful. They put a lot of conservative judges on the court, including 3 on the Supreme Court. So this worked out really well from Mitch McConnell's point of view. But the breaking point finally came for him after the election of 2020, in particular in Georgia, when in Mitch McConnell's view, Trump torpedoed the chances of winning these 2 special elections and cost McConnell the Republican majority in the Senate. So the worst day for him comes not on January 6th, but on January 5th, when he loses the majority. And then January 6th, of course, is the ultimate, explosion of that. And Mitch McConnell does not vote to convict him, but gives a speech on the Senate floor excoriating Trump, saying he is responsible for everything that happened. And ever since, he has been enemy number 1 to President Trump, to the point where a couple of days ago, he literally used the words death wish in a public message about Mitch McConnell, all in caps. And he can say this is not meant to be a threat. But by now, President Trump certainly knows that a lot of his people, some of his people, are paying very close and literal attention to his words and taking them in a way that is dangerous, I think.
Lindsey Graham. Lindsey gets a fair bit of attention in the book. I think you actually do, whereas for many of the people that you list, you don't necessarily cite whether you talk to them, but in this case, you say that I think Lindsey helped inspire you to write the book.
Yeah.
Tell Tell us about Lindsey Graham and his journey with President Trump.
Yeah. Lindsey Graham, we do single out Lindsey Graham for a lot of attention because in some ways he represents the Republican establishment more broadly, right? Lindsey Graham runs against him in 2016 and calls him a kook. Says he's the most unqualified person ever to be president. Says that picking between him and Ted Cruz would be like picking between cancer and a gunshot, to the head. So he is not a Trump fan until Trump wins and comes to office, when suddenly he is, right? And it's that evolution that is fascinating to us. And so we explore that in this book. And we do have a scene in there where we run into Lindsey Graham on the street one day in Washington after dinner in 2019. And he just starts talking. Yeah, I just got off the phone with the president and everything. And he seems dazzled by how much the president is willing to give him access, right? Which no other president had ever done. And Trump, whatever else you say about him, he's willing to call anybody, anytime. With President Obama, if you remember the Congress or Senate, you want to have a meeting or a phone call, and then there'd be a debate between your aides and their aides, and a drafting session of talking points and whatever agenda. It'd be weeks before you get them on the phone. If you were a Republican senator during the Trump era, you could call the White House, I'd like to talk to President Trump. And if he didn't get on the phone right that second, he would call you back pretty quickly. This is intoxicating to a lot of them, by the way. And for some of them, it made them overlook the concerns that they had. So that Lindsey Graham, who said he was a kook, his word, a kook in the 2016 election, goes on CNN in 2017, 2018 and says, I can't stand these media people who keep calling him a kook. How dare anybody call him a kook? Okay, well, we weren't the first.
So is Lindsey,
and he says, so he's just to get the scene.
Sure.
Sorry, I think you were asking about the scene on the street. He says, he's talking to Trump and he says, look, he's a lying motherfucker. Sorry, my language, his language, not mine. But then he adds, he's a lot of fun to hang out with. He likes going golfing with him. And he says at one point, he says, yeah, he could kill 50 people on our side. He could shoot 50 people on our side, meaning senators, and it would still be okay. Like that's, there's this extraordinary acceptance by the established Republicans of somebody that they themselves thought was unqualified and reckless.
So is he an enabler or part of the axis of adults?
I don't think he's part of the axis of adults. I think that he thought, and he certainly would tell you, he was trying to steer the president in the right direction. And there were certainly times he talked him out of things or tried to talk him out of things that people thought would have been reckless or unwise or illegal or unethical. But it's hard not to look at him as an enabler as well. Trump had his number. Trump called him privately. He said nice things to him in private, but behind his back, he called him the 85%er. Yeah, he's for me 85% of the time. He still thought of Lindsey as sort of using their relationship, but he was happy to do that. And even when Lindsey finally gets off the train, that's his words on January 6th, I'm done. I tried, I'm done. Within a day or two, he's suddenly back on the train saying, well, I didn't mean forever. I just meant about the election.
Nancy Pelosi.
Hates him. Really, really hates him. Oh my God.
Was there ever respect on Trump's part for her use of the process?
Yeah, I think he respected her at first. I think he respected her as a strong player, right? The thing that matters most to Trump is strength. If he perceives you as strong, he may have respect for you. And he perceived her to be strong, which she is. But he thought he could charm her, which he couldn't. Trump thinks he can charm anybody. She was uncharmable. She did not think he was funny or charming or interesting in that way. She had been warned once by some other women who had dealt with him in New York. First, he'll try to flatter, then he'll sue you. And so, she had his number, I think, from the beginning. Literally, the first meeting they have when she's a minority leader of the House Democrats comes to the White House with other congressional leaders. Days after the election, he starts talking about how the 2016 election was rigged. Never mind the 2020 election, the 2016 election that he won, he was complaining was rigged. They had 3 million illegal votes. That's the only reason why Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. He can't take yes for an answer. He has to win both the electoral vote and that popular vote. Of course, there's no evidence whatsoever that there was any kind of fraud like that. In fact, he appointed a commission that then closed shop without having found anything. But Nancy Pelosi says to him, what are you talking about? There's no such thing. And I think from the very beginning, that sort of flavored their relationship.
One thing that you hear from a lot of Trump officials is don't pay attention to Trump, pay attention to what we accomplished. In fact, they're trying to tell that to the president after the election. This is time for you to start doing a victory tour for all the things you accomplished, and maybe you can run for re-election. In your own interviews with the president, you say that he didn't seem to care very much about his accomplishments. So is this 4 years with no policy accomplishments? Were there anything that they got done, that he got done?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are policy accomplishments for sure. If you are, I mean, especially if you're conservative, first of all, you did get 3 justices on the Supreme Court, and there's no, ironically, for a thrice married, adultering, non-religious, president, there's probably no president who was better for the evangelical Christian movement than President Trump, because you can argue that his Supreme Court appointments resulted in the overturning of Roe v. Wade, a goal for 50 years. So that's how transactional it is. You may not like him, he may not be your cup of tea, but he did what you wanted. So yes, policy achievements would include, if you're conservative, 3 Supreme Court justices and the overturning of Roe. It would include tax cuts and regulation cuts. It would include the Abraham Accords. It would include a tougher position toward China, which is now a more bipartisan viewpoint these days. Democrats have not lifted the tariffs on China, even if they disagree with his rhetoric, thinking he was racist or went too far on it. That they have not disagreed that China policy needed to be tougher. He redid the NAFTA trade accord. He got out of Paris climate and got out of the Iran nuclear accord. Again, we can agree or disagree with them, but these are policy goals, and he accomplished them as he sought to do them.
Promises kept.
Promises kept in that sense. But some of the biggest things he promised to do, he never did, right? He was going to build a wall. Didn't happen. Sorry. They did replace some existing wall, but they basically built almost no new wall, very, very small number of miles of new wall. He promised to solve the immigration problem. I don't think it's solved. He promised to force Iran to give up its nuclear program. He hasn't done that. He's going to have a deal with North Korea. He didn't do that either. He said that solving Israeli-Palestinian conflict would be easier than anybody imagines. Obviously, it didn't turn out to be easier than anybody imagined. So yeah, he had some failures. But most interestingly, also getting rid of Obamacare, which was a big goal of his, which he didn't do. But the policy never really mattered that much to him. It wasn't about that. Let's just take tax cuts, for instance, is probably his biggest single domestic legislative achievement, had nothing to do with it. How do we know that? Because in our book, we quote his top tax guy. The top tax guy to President Trump told us on the record, in quotes, Donald Trump had nothing to do with this. It was done entirely on the Hill by Republicans who crafted the bill. The only thing President Trump cared about was the branding. He wanted to call it a cut bill, because that would get the message across to the public. Even his allies in the Hill thought that was a little too juvenile. So he was not a policy guy. He was all about the fight. He wanted to have the fight.
Let me ask you about one policy that's in the news every day. We spend a lot of time at center, as I just mentioned to you, and that you have written a book about, Vladimir Putin, Russia, Ukraine. I guess at some level, we could say it's an accomplishment that Donald Trump introduced the country to the complexities of the Russia-Ukraine conversation, as we saw in the first impeachment. What did you learn there? You know about Vladimir Putin very well. Why the fascination with Putin? Is Dan Coates, I think you quote in the book, as saying that he had real questions himself about why Trump and Putin were so aligned.
This is the enduring mystery, right? And it will continue to be a mystery. We did not solve it. It will continue to be a mystery. My guess is years and decades to come, just as we're still writing new books about Watergate or other, presidential history. We're going to be writing books. We collectively are going to be writing books about Trump for years to come. And this issue will be one that will challenge every historian. What on earth did President Trump see in Vladimir Putin that made him so affectionate toward him, admiring toward him? And you're right. I mean, it perplexed even members of his own government. After the Helsinki summit, you remember when he's standing next to President Putin, and he says, in effect, he believes President Putin over his own intelligence agencies about the election interference in 2016. It wasn't just the reporters in the room, like my wife, who was there, who were shocked. It was Dan Coates, as Bill just mentioned, who was the director of national intelligence back here in Virginia. He was in Langley watching this, and he looked at this when he was shocked. Dan Coates, by the way, no liberal, no deep state guy, Republican senator, former chief of staff to Dan Quayle, appointed by President Trump. He watched what President Trump said, and it was like a gut blow. And he said to people back then, he says, maybe then Putin really does have something on Trump. This guy has access to all of the nation's secrets, Dan Coates does. And he thinks it's possible that the president of the United States is compromised by Russia and doesn't know can't think of any other reason for why Trump would be so solicitous of a dictator or autocrat like Vladimir Putin, because it is so perplexing. Now, we've asked a lot of people about this. What's the answer? There are people who work for him on his NSC staff and say, look, it's just about strong men. He likes strong men. He likes strong men, and he likes strong men, right? Autocrats, authoritarians, Erdogan, Duterte, Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un. These are people he admires because they represent strength. And this was what his father told him he always had to be. His father's biggest compliment was, you're a killer. Hopefully his father didn't mean that in a literal sense, but it is a literal sense with Vladimir Putin. And that was something that Trump seemed to admire. Other people say, like Michael Cohen, who was Trump's lawyer and fixer before we broke with him, it says it looks all about money. With Trump, everything is about money. He had wanted to build a tower in Moscow since 1987. And when the American banks stopped doing business with Trump because they couldn't trust him anymore, it was the Russians who bailed him out. How do we know that? His own son said so. We get most of our money from Russia now, they said. So we don't know that there was anything more criminal there. Robert Mueller told us there wasn't a criminal conspiracy that he could find, but he didn't investigate the money either. So we still don't know the real answer. But I'll tell you this, last thing I'll say about this, what we discovered in our research is it seems to be a one-way street. The love affair, or whatever it is that President Trump has for President Putin, is not reciprocated. There's a meeting in Osaka, Japan, where the G20 is meeting, and Putin and Trump are meeting on the sidelines of it alone. And Trump is doing this Trump thing. He's doing the braggadocio thing. You know, they like me so much in Poland, they're naming a fort after me, Fort Trump. And they like me so much in Israel, they're naming a settlement after me, Trump Heights. And Putin has his number. Putin looks at him and says very drolly, he says, maybe they should just name all of Israel after you, Donald. Because Putin gets it. He gets the hubris, he gets the narcissism, and he's mocking him. He's mocking him. This is in private. This is not in front of the press. He's mocking him. So it's a kind of an odd thing where it seems to be a one-way street.
I want to shift to the final category we look at, which is president's relationship with the American people. You, at the beginning and then at the end of the book, I think the final chapter, the final paragraphs, you have this extraordinary run where you talk about, you and Susan talk about, there's a president who twice lost the popular vote, who never gets above 50% in the Gallup poll. I think maybe not above 45%, it gets 47% of the electorate, but
he got to 49 for like a few days. But
okay, 49.
But you're right, keep going.
Who, for the first time since Herbert Hoover, loses both houses of Congress in a 4-year period. And yet he is still wildly popular with the people who supported him.
Yeah.
I want to read to you a letter that I recently got, an email that I got from somebody who follows Miller Center stuff. It's a UVA grad, won't say the name, but I'm sure you get letters like this all the time. This is somebody contesting that we are not doing enough, essentially pro-Trump, and that including the election fraud. Mr. Antholis, I don't mean to harass you or troll you.
Well, that by itself is a nicer letter than I ever got.
It was after my responding to a not so nice letter.
Okay, all right.
I am not a Russian disinformation agent. I am merely trying to encourage you and the Miller Center to use discernment and to seek the truth. Point it out, please, if I have missed a program where there's some critical thought that went against the prevailing narrative. I disciple and mentor 18 to 25-year-olds. I know you are probably saying to yourself, Lord, help me with this guy. And I get that. However, these young people are smart and savvy. They are searching for truth because they look around and they see institutions, parentheses like universities, hospital, news, government, etc., that they are thought to trust, lie to them over and over. They see hospitals killing their patients, remdesivir and morphine, for money. They see schools and corporations creating division in the name of progress, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They see pharmaceutical companies recording profits while their vaccines, in quotes, are killing people. Blood clotting, strokes, unexplained deaths. They see criminals lifted up as heroes, George Floyd, as cities burn in, quote, mostly peaceful protests. They see little boys being told they can become little girls, and vice versa, the trans agenda. They are told they are racist, and racism is rampant in our country, so rampant that race crimes have to be faked. Jesse Smollett. They see the US sending billions of dollars to one of the most corrupt countries in the world when we have struggling Americans here at home, Ukraine. They see all of this and it doesn't make any sense to them. They want to know why, and they want to know the truth. Did Donald Trump create the base, or did the base create Donald Trump?
Yeah, that's a good question. And look, it's important to understand that it's you cannot dismiss 40% or whatever of the population that does find something about Trump very appealing. It's important to understand why they do. Now, I would say if you were to go through the specifics of that particular letter, you could certainly take issue with a lot of the factual representations there. A lot of that is based on misinformation or certainly exaggeration. And that's part of the issue, right? Is that we are not living in the same fact world anymore. When you and I were growing up, we had 3 networks and we all listened to Walter, and whatever Walter told us, we believed to be true. And then we debated it, right? Okay, we had the same facts, but then we debated what they meant. We debated what we should do about them, right? Today, we all live in our own little fact world, left or right. We could go to wherever we want to go to get the information that reinforces our preconceptions and that doesn't challenge us to think otherwise. And we can argue about who's worse in that regard, and that's fine. But it means we're not coming together and we're not having a common conversation. And I think this letter writer puts his finger or her finger on an essential explanation for Trump's support, which is this idea. It's a grievance politics, right? That there's somebody else who's putting one over on us. Whoever they is, they might be the government, they might be the media, they might be, the institutions of higher learning, they might be people who are not of the same color that we are, people not the same gender we are, people not the same sexuality we are. Somebody somewhere is putting something over on us. And Trump is the only one who's speaking truth to power. He's the only one who's saying it like it is. He's willing to say it while the rest of them are afraid. They're politically correct. That is a powerful force out there. Now, if you're looking for Trump for truth, there is a challenge because that's not exactly a strong point. Our friends at the Washington Post actually, collected all this. They counted more than 30,000 false or misleading statements that President Trump made during his presidency. 30,000. Now you say to me, well, all presidents lie. Fair enough. Let's just assume that's true. None of them, I think, have come close to 30,000. None of them. When they say, well, Obama lied, and they always give the exact same example, and they can't tell me other ones. They always come back to the same one. Okay, let's just assume that's a lie, as opposed to, I think it's more of a broken promise. But let's just call it a lie. Nobody can come up with 30,000 examples of any other president who can't stick to the truth. I mean, in our interviews with him, we did 2 interviews with him. Literally, the first thing he told us, the second interview, contradicted the first thing he told us, the first interview. He told us different stories within the same interview. He contradicted himself. So as a fact witness, as a truth teller, there's something to be lost here. But for a lot of his supporters, he is still a truth teller in the broad sense because he is saying something broadly true, even if his facts may be wrong or even the function of Russian disinformation or what have you. And it's hard not to see that as an important lesson for where we are as a country right now. You can't just dismiss it. What do you do about it? That's for somebody smarter than me. But a lot of people are attracted to him because they perceive him to be saying what they think and feel, but don't feel empowered to say.
And are there instances where he doesn't hit the mark with the base and he self-corrects?
Absolutely. Yeah. To your point, you asked the question, I didn't really answer it. In fact, in our, the vaccine is a great example, right? You ask what achievements. Under any definition, the COVID vaccine would be a pretty important achievement for any president. Now, you could say this wasn't really him, it was a scientist. Or you could say, look, he gets some credit for front-ending the money in order to push it through at a faster pace. Whatever your point of view is, it happened on his watch. Every president claims something good that happens on his watch. as his achievement. This was done in record time and has arguably saved millions of lives. Why won't he take credit for it? Because he got booed at a rally, right? He mentioned at a rally, you should take the vaccine. They booed him, and that's it. He won't talk about it again. Remember, he got it himself, but he didn't do it on camera. His family got it. His daughter and got it. I think she did do it on camera, but Trump wouldn't do it on camera. He is, and I thought that tells you something important, because yes, he is a master of the base, but he is also a captive of it.
We're starting to collect questions from the audience, including from the web audience out there. So please start them coming in. Before I turn to them, one final question. Peter, it is such a big book, and I don't mean in terms of the length, though it is that too. It's sweeping and it has a driving narrative. Let me take the narrative one step further. You say in the book that the reason you wrote it is at some level because the 4 years worth, what we saw on January 6th and the end of his presidency were really the culmination.
Yeah.
And a lot of these things that we've just discussed, the people continue as the administration goes along to being the people around the president as the administration goes along are the ones that are closer to following him on January 6th. The processes are more about him doing that. Even the priorities end up veering in that direction and the things going on. Is he the most consequential political figure of our time? Or potentially another way to think about it is, are he and Obama two sides of the same coin? Celebrity presidents who developed a deep emotional connection with not just a base, but maybe some other Americans who had wavered. Obama being an avatar of hope for racial reconciliation, and Trump being an avatar of fears, both his base's fears of what America was becoming, but the rest of the country's fears of what he and his base were becoming. Yeah. Where does it net out for you about his place in history, if it's only history?
I think it's a great question, and it's a really smart and thoughtful way to look at it, as the two sides of the yin yang coin. We don't know what his place in history is for a couple of reasons yet. One is he an aberration that 50 years from now we'll say, well, boy, that was a crazy time, but we got back to some sort of a semblance of normal, or has he permanently altered our system? And we won't know that for a while because he's not done, right? It's not just history. It's a live action situation right now.
You actually call it a criminal crime scene.
It is. I mean, still, yeah. I mean, in a way, it's still an active crime scene. They literally there's still damage you can see in the Capitol if you go look at it. That is the point of the book. Which is, thank you for saying, which is that the January 6th was not an aberration, was not a one-off. It was the culmination of a 4-year war on institutions. To him, the military was not supposed to be an apolitical force to defend the country, but was supposed to be his own tool for political advantage. Same with the Justice Department and the justice system. Same with the intelligence agency, even the health care professionals. All of these were meant not to be, serving the public good, but to bend their will to him. Remember, the Justice Department indicted 2 Republican congressmen like a month or 2 before the midterms in 2018. He complained, "How dare you do this? You're going to cost me those seats." He did that publicly. A president might do that privately, by the way. That would not be unusual for a president to be unhappy that the Justice Department had caused this big problem. He did it publicly. He didn't see that as something to be ashamed of, that he wanted the Justice Department to determine guilt or innocence based on his political needs. That was okay with him because that's what he wanted. So that is a very fundamental challenge to the system as we have designed it over 246 years. What will be 20 years from now? The system is only the way we're going to be able to evaluate him in history. Is that a permanent change or was he an aberration? Do people find that to be, if we reinvent the election system so that they can toss out votes we don't like, and that's a big, fundamental, consequential change. So yes, he could be the most consequential president of our lifetime, but we don't know for sure.
So from our webinar audience, someone asks, what most concerns you about the future of the country? Small question.
Look, we don't, I mean, this is the thing, we liked or didn't like Clinton or Bush or Obama, but we didn't question that the country was going forward in keeping with the values that we had established 246 years ago. We're rewatching the John Adams series from HBO because David McCullough passed away. So we've been thinking about McCullough's great work and watching them design our system back then and thinking about it today is remarkable. It's remarkable. We've had a lot of challenges along the way. That system started with slavery. That system started with, only landed white men who were able to vote. We didn't have direct democracy anywhere close to the way we did. The Senate wasn't picked by the voters. There are a lot of things back then to now that we have evolved and changed. And the question is whether we're going to change in the other direction. And having spent 4 years in Russia, having watched Vladimir Putin dismantle the very much more fragile and nascent institutions of democracy that were only starting back then, the question for me is are we heading in that direction here? We tell the story in the book. There's an old Soviet joke. A guy is picked up by an ambulance. Ambulance is driving down the roads of Moscow. The guy in the back looks up and realizes that they're not heading to the hospital. He says, "Where are we going?" He says, "We're going to the morgue," says the driver. "Well, why are we going to the morgue?" He says, "I'm not dead." He says, "Well, we're not there yet." And that's where I feel. And that was told as a metaphor for Russian democracy. And my worry is it may apply here too.
So we have a couple questions here about the future of the Republican Party. Looking past 2024, what are your thoughts about the future of the Republican Party? But that's like maybe asking what happens after the cemetery. But at this point, is Trump not the establishment of the Republican Party? He defines it at present, so shouldn't this terminology be set aside?
Well, I take that point. He is certainly the dominant figure in the Republican Party. He is the determinant right now of what constitutes republicanism. Remember, in his mind and the way he has defined it, if you don't agree that the 2020 election was stolen, you are not a Republican. It's not enough that you disagree with him. You're not a Republican. R-I-N-O, Rhino, Republican in name only. He is saying you don't get to be a Republican if you disagree with me. So which is, by the way, again, Ronald Reagan, George Bush, not the other George Bush, none of them did that. They wanted to expand their party. They wanted to expand it. They wanted to be a big tent. They wanted people who disagree with them to come over and convince them that they were right. Trump, ironically, is trying to downsize his party, but use the more fervent, remainder to great effect. Now, the Republican Party the office holders in Washington do not like Trump. If you put him under true serum, 2/3 of the members of Congress who are Republican would just, trash Trump left and right. They won't say it. Why won't they say it? Because he controls the party. I asked a Republican senator once, I said, why, you don't like Trump? And he said, I don't like Trump. So what, tell me what's going on here? And he said, this is not on the record, obviously. He says, well, they just had a poll in my state. They had, and it said 88% of Republicans support him. What do you want me to do? They're caught right now, for as long as Trump has the support of the base, to be enthralled to him. And the only thing that will change that is if when they give up, when the Republicans base gives up on Trump, if they do, or if he exits the scene in some way. I'm reminded, though, not to be too ominous. I didn't mean to be too ominous. I am an optimist in general. We have gone through periods of tough times in history and come through them, right? I mean, eventually periods like this tend to burn out. McCarthyism burned out, right? We had a civil war. We've been through worse than what we're seeing now. And we've had Reconstruction. We had the civil rights, the poll tax and all of that. We've had really rough moments that we have come through eventually. And I'm still an optimist that we will come through this too.
Just to follow on that, you're writing the book, it dawned on me when reading that you were writing the book while the January 6th hearings were unfolding. I don't know when you exactly put the book to bed, but my guess is that before all the hearings had happened. Got it.
Very annoying.
With more revelations every day, and the thing that you were telling us a little bit earlier, that in your own conversations with President Trump about January 6th, whether the Secret Service told him he couldn't go to the Capitol or not, he was on both sides of that issue in the same sentence. I think you explained to us. I'm just curious, having then finished the book while watching the hearings, did that change your view about his viability moving forward. It was one Republican witness after another, two Republicans on the committee, regardless of what the Republican leadership felt. There was a palpable sense that there was some impact of that, but we haven't seen a hearing now in a few weeks, and maybe it fades.
Well, this is important to remember. All of the witnesses, or nearly all of the witnesses who appear before the January 6th committee, and nearly all the sources for our book are Republican, or were Trump appointees, or were otherwise public servants who are dedicated to the country, not to a party. These were not liberals. The sources of our stories in this book, the sources of our tale, our narrative, our history, are people who work for him. The people who are most concerned about Trump, we found in our research, were the people who were closest to him, people who were in the room and watched what was happening. We're not making this up. This is not us being political or partisan. The report in this book is what people in the room told us. And that's what makes it so powerful, so important. Now, does that have an effect on anybody else, the public? Look, there's not going to be a moment where suddenly, boom, the public turns against him or his own base turns against him. If they would have, that would have been after January 6th, didn't happen, right? So we were talking about this earlier. There is a possibility of a fatigue factor. That's what a lot of regular Republicans or establishment Republicans, or whatever word we're supposed to use about them, are hoping for. Paleo Republicans, right? Nearly extinct Republicans, whatever we want to call them. They are hoping that he will burn himself out and he will eventually go away. And there is some, anecdotal suggestion that there is a fatigue factor setting in. NBC and its polling asked this question. It asked Republicans, do you consider yourself more a supporter of the Republican Party or a supporter of Donald Trump? In the most recent poll, 33% Donald Trump. Now that's a large number. And by the way, it's enough to win you a primary if there's multiple candidates. But it's the lowest number since they started asking that in 2019. Does that mean people are slowly beginning? I think a lot of people out there, a lot of Republicans out there think, yeah, I like a lot of things that Trump did. I agree with a lot of things he did. We should get out of Afghanistan. I didn't like NAFTA. I think being tough on China makes sense. I'm for lower taxes. I'm for getting rid of abortion. A lot of Republicans think he did some good things and they like it. But the question is whether they go tired of him and say, okay, can we get those same things without the mishigas, without the drama? Do we have to live in the past? Do we have to keep refighting the 2020 election, or can we get them with another candidate? Right now, he is by far the dominant candidate. If he runs in 2024, if you would be silly not to put up money on anybody else right now. Having said that, DeSantis leads him by 7 or 8 points in Florida, their mutual home state. Doesn't necessarily mean anything, but it's interesting. So the question is there a point at which we begin to, the Republicans begin to move away from?
Maybe that's a bridge to a couple questions about the media. One here, given that we all seem entitled to our own facts, how does democracy survive? Are we headed toward an autocracy? But I'd love for you to talk about the media's role in presenting facts, including conservative media. And then maybe that's a bridge to where is the conservative media going on Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, the fragmentation of the media and the advent of social media are the biggest changes in our society in a lot of ways in the last generation. They have pulled us apart, right? We are living in different spaces anymore. We talked about that a little earlier. And it makes a challenge for legacy media, or whatever phrase you want to use about the New York Times and the Washington Post and those folks. We do not want to be liberal media. We've always been called that by conservatives, in part because our editorial pages tend to be liberal. That's not how we see ourselves in the newsroom. We do not see ourselves as liberal or conservatives. We see ourselves as reporters. We are there and Trump tried to make us the opposite. And we fall for it too often, right? What did he say? He said, you're enemies of the people. He says, fake news. Every president hates the media. It's totally normal. Your oral histories, I'm sure, would show that if we went through them enough times. But none of them did what that suggests. To say enemies of the people is a Stalinist phrase used to justify sending people to the gulag. To say fake news at across the board way that he did is to discredit the whole idea of the news industry, to discredit the idea of a free press. That's the danger, right? It's not to say, look, that story's wrong. I don't like this newspaper. It's saying the very idea is wrong. Now, Leslie Stahl once asked President Trump about this. Why do you always attack the media this way? He says, look, I want to make sure to discredit you guys so that when you write something negative about me, people won't believe you. He was very honest about it. I mean, that's the thing about Trump. He's very transparent about his motivations and what he's thinking. And I think that's true. He wants to discredit the free press. Now, it's not for us to fall for that. He wants to make us the opposition. We are not the opposition. It is not our job to be the opposition. A lot of our friends on the left would like us to be the opposition and are mad at us. I have a lot of people who follow me on Twitter who think I'm terrible. I'm a Trump apologist and all that because they want us to be something we're not. Marty Barron said it right. He was the editor of the Washington Post. He said, we're not at war, we're at work. That's what journalists should be. And the only way to restore our credibility is to be reporters, not players. That doesn't mean there can't be columnists and commentators. They're fine. That's part of the media. The media is not one monolithic thing, and we shouldn't talk about it that way. Totally cool to have commentators and pundits who give opinions. My job as a beat reporter, though, is to provide you facts and analysis, fact-based analysis. I don't tell you what I think about, healthcare or whether taxes should be here or here. What I'm trying to do is report to you what I learned from my reporting, and then you guys and the whole country, from reporters in general, can decide what to do with that.
But and just to be fair and clear, and I don't think you're saying anything different than this, fact-based analysis is both laying out the facts, but organizing it in a way that leads to, if not a set of conclusions, a next set of questions that the reader should ask.
Yeah. And it's a fuzzy line these days. I get it. And I think we have done a terrible job, the media, of keeping our silos separate. I go on MSNBC and I'm seated next to a person who is an opinion person. That's fine. That person's an opinion person, but I'm not. I shouldn't be. And I shouldn't be asked to do the same thing that person does, right? But we've stopped making that distinction too often, I think, in the media. We don't explain ourselves, what we're trying to do to our readers and our viewers. We don't say to them, there's a difference between news reporting and commentary because it all just seems to be one big blur. And I would say that's a completely valid criticism of us. What I do is a news analysis, which I hope is different than an opinion column, is it does tend to be, should be fact-based. And yes, it draws conclusions, but not hopefully of an ideological kind or a pro this or anti that kind. But here's what my experience and my reporting tells me. I've covered 5 presidents. I've written books about 2 others. Here's what I can say is new or not new. Here's what's different or not different. Here's what you should know about this that you might not be aware of.
So exactly to that point, people really want to know your opinion. So for instance, do you think Trump has done irreparable damage to the rule of law? Related, please speculate. I want you to speculate too. Please speculate about the impact if when Trump is indicted for seditious conspiracy and put on trial.
To that point, I try very hard to avoid opinions. In fact, I've said this in the same setting before and got a lot of oohs and ahs in the crowd. So I'm going to say it again, but I don't vote. I've chosen not to vote since 1996. I don't tell other journalists that that's what they should do. Every journalist makes up his or her own mind about how they approach their jobs and how they should try to maintain an open mind. But for me, it's one way I try to not be beholden to a candidate or a party, but to keep an open mind about what I'm looking at and viewing. And my view is if I have voted for somebody I cover, because I cover the White House, or voted against the person I cover, I have a small but important rooting interest in proving that I was right to myself, right? And I shouldn't be that. So my hope is to try to avoid that. I'm not giving very much up. I live in the District of Columbia. It's a very lopsided jurisdiction. My vote wouldn't change anything. 100,000 votes wouldn't change anything in the District of Columbia. But I understand when people criticize that, to say you're a citizen, you have a duty to vote. I understand that and respect that. I really do. But I've chosen not to do that as a way of trying to be as professional as I can be. Understanding that I fail at that every day. We all do. But I'm not gonna, seditious. I mean, we'll see whether he gets indicted or not. I mean, I don't know, honestly. I think that I think the Justice Department is having a hard time figuring out the January 6th thing and what the theory of the case would be legally. What would you charge him with? We don't have a lot of experience with this. Not an easy statute on the book that says,
It's fascinating because that's the problem in the first 2 impeachments.
Yeah,
right. The charges in both were sort of off. You chronicle that in the book.
It's a little, yeah, because it's not,
They were softish.
it's not, I mean, abuse of power has been traditionally defined as an impeachable offense, but what does it mean? Right? It's not as clear cut as the statute. And so I think that's why the classified document thing may be easier. I'm not a lawyer. It may be easier though for them to charge if they decide the facts and the law back it up, because there is a pretty clear cut law about presidential documents. You guys understand that as well as anybody as conservators of history. And there's a pretty clear argument about obstruction that they're making right now, in that they were told that the documents have been returned when they hadn't been, right? And they have suggested in the legal documents that could constitute obstruction. In some ways, that narrower case, much smaller by comparison to what January 6th is, which is huge, may be more legally dangerous for the president. But again, I'm not a lawyer. I'm reflecting what some lawyers are telling me.
We are at time, but I can't help but ask one last question because it has a potentially hopeful note to end on. Now that you've written a book on division, can you talk about how this division can be overcome?
The really good thing about being a reporter is we're good at identifying problems. We're not so good on the solution side of things. I am an optimist. I do think that we go through cycles where we are at each other's throats and then we kind of come back together again. And I feel like we'll get there, but I can't tell you how. I don't know how. And I worry because in past generations, we didn't have things like social media and the fragmentation of our media, which make it easier to stay apart. We are literally, we are so divided these days that they ask people in a poll, would it bother you if your son or daughter married somebody from the other political party? And in 1960s, it was around 4 or 5%. People said, yeah, that would bother me. Today, it's closer to 50%, right? I don't want no Republicans showing up for my Thanksgiving table. I don't want no Democrats showing up for Christmas, right? We don't even want to have our communication with each other. We live separately. The number is 700 people per square mile. If you live in a place with more than that, you're twice as likely to be a Democrat. If you live in a place with less than that, you're twice as likely to be a Republican. We are sorting ourselves. We are moving apart physically and metaphysically. And this is really very troubling. And I don't know, therefore, how does that get reversed? How do we come together? How do we see eye to eye? And I don't see a political figure on the horizon who seems capable of bringing us together. In other words, I don't see name them, our best, political figures like FDR or Reagan, who managed to cross lines and sort of, I mean, they were divisive figures too in their own way. I'm not trying to pretend there wasn't, but it's hard to see how. But I do think that will happen. I do think that we will get through this period of polarization and that we will come out of it on the other side. I just can't tell you how.
Well, Peter, I feel optimistic because of what you're doing and what everyone here is doing, which is getting together, talk about these issues, doing it in person. As much as webinars have served us well and continue to serve us well, there's nothing like the real thing in person. And I hope this helps you sell some books, but I know that that's not the real reason you're doing it. But for those who want to buy a book, we have them in the back.
I'm not against it.
I think we'd like to ask you, after some final concluding applause for Peter, to let him leave first so he can get back there and man his station. And with that, Peter, thank you. And thanks, Susan, please. We look forward to having her.
I'm sorry she's not here. I apologize for that.
But you all have made a really important contribution that I know we'll want to stay in touch about. So thank you
very much. Appreciate that. Thank you, Dennis.